Welcome to my video essay series, where we consult the great oracle deep in nearby Wetherspoons, and if you listen closely enough, through the haze of cigarette smoke and ruddles, you can hear him murmur the name of a game. Today's game, Nier Automata. We will be taking Nier and using critique to make meaning out of it. The gameplay footage in the background is randomly selected from some of my favourite moments, and if it happens to line up to what I'm talking about, this is very much by error, and you should not read anything into it. This video will contain spoilers throughout. Consider yourself warned. Nier is one of these games that has many layers of complexity, taking many interesting components to weave together a whole that is fascinating. A game on its surface about androids fighting machines in the name of humans. A character action game with over-the-top moves meant to kinetically awe. Not without precedent either. The team behind the action elements of the game is Platinum, a highly regarded peer within the genre. In a war that has gone on, well, longer than anyone's memory, we play as 2B, with the B standing for Battle Unit. Joined by 9S, or Scanner Unit, we have to traverse across an area of Earth fighting the good fight against the machines. And we are not machines, we are androids, created in the image of man to continue their fight against the machines, who were created by aliens, presumably in their image, to fight against man. But how are we going to remember any of this? It's outside of anyone's living memory. This base setup may sound confusing. The way I have described it is actually relatively simple. We are a unit of fighters with a target which we must take down. The initial mission is to take down a Goliath, a mega machine, huge in structure and of high fighting capability. 2B with her attack squad are sent in formation in an aerial invasion, and are just annihilated. These battle units do not stand a chance on their approach. This first section lands us in an area much frequented later, the factory. Used to manufacture weapons of war for the humans, it has been converted to manufacture machines as weapons of war. Fighting through a horde of machines, we head to find our target. In amongst the goofy arm-waving tin cans, we get to the Goliath. Now I love the Goliath, a combination of modern machinery bolted together into a utilitarian killing machine. It sets a standard for machines as being, well, odd looking. Never quite the lethal killers they are made out to be. And throughout these combats the game sets up a tradition, a continuous perspective shift depending on the fight. In some areas the camera is locked above the action, or from the side, making it two-dimensional. Well, not actually two-dimensional, but playing like a 2D game. These continual perspective shifts create the neat effect visually, and are entertaining just from the point of view of uniqueness, with it not being a common technique used in the medium. And at the end, we fight this Goliath, constructed out of factory parts, almost pure machine stylistically. We find out later that it's named Engels, the philosopher and buddy of Karl Marx, which is fun considering his position in philosophy as commentator on factories as workspaces. After fighting through multiple distinct sections, some bullet hell, some in an aerial combat device, it culminates in this touching scene where 2B and 9S decide to blow themselves up to take down even more appearing Goliaths. And this is where some of the thematic elements kick off. You see, before the end of the fight, 9S was able to upload your data to the bunker, the base of Yorha, the name of the android fighting force, but he was not able to upload his own data. He's going off an older save file, one without the experience of the factory. You see, saving is an explicit diegetic decision in this game. What do I mean by this word salad? Firstly, there is no autosave. Every single time you save, it is by choice. Secondly, there is an in-world rationale behind this. You're uploading your data to the bunker each time you choose to save. Diegetic is a term I first heard in reference to musical score for a film. Sometimes we hear music that none of the characters can hear, it's been played just for the viewer. But sometimes there is music coming from a radio which we and the characters get to partake in. It is in the world. Well, this, applied to the saving process, it's something that grounds the meaning for the gamer as well as the characters in the game. But, and that's a big old but, it comes at the cost of accessibility. For instance, in the introductory section of the game, up to the bunker, you are unable to save, which makes it a barrier of entry for accessibility for a multitude of reasons, from disability to living a busy life. I remember the first time I played through this section, I died 2 or 3 times having to revert back to the beginning, and honestly nothing was gained in developing the world or narrative, it's just frustrating. Add onto this a whole host of reasons that would mean you are more likely to die here. You are just learning the controls, for instance. It ends up creating this needless barrier. A bit one with interesting artistic implications. whilst we continue on this brief aside, I do fall on the side of making it easier for more people. It's easy to see how small changes to the story would make it easier without sacrificing the core narrative stuff it's going for. And this is all in a game that has these great auto-chip components that aid with things like dodging without having to press a button, a diegetic reason for having optional easier difficulties, ones that allow you to select the components of combat you are struggling with. Tired of holding down that shoot button? There is an auto-chip for that. Although it can only be allowed on the easiest difficulty, meaning that in general the game is a little less than fully customizable. I always end up thinking back to Dishonored 2 and the modular difficulty options. You see, I always turn down the guard's ability to look up, but have all the other options on hard, as that is a space that gives the game both a level of resistance to me in a way that I find fun. I would love that level of granularity here, instead of just locking it behind an easy mode. Anyway, back to the main point. But don't worry, I'm not going to go through a full blow by blow of the game. A last couple of steps before we talk about the game writ large. We are sent from the bunker with a quick chant of glory to mankind to go and further the aims of Yorha by contacting the resistance leader, setting off a quest chain for the game. Each of these quests take place on a world map which encompasses several, as well as side quests. Each are mini explorations of the themes of the game, with you often having to kill some machines along the way. So just before we dive into themes, let's do a quick diversion into bodies, as it is something that I just cannot untangle from the rest, and I don't think it fits in the conversation I've got planned out ahead, although it's super important. 2B is a character that's designed in a revealing outfit. Alone, this isn't something that I have too much of a problem with, but it sets up this character who is central to a character action game where she just absolutely kicks ass. It's something that actually still remains subversive to a degree to this day, but you have the camera constantly dragging downwards when you sprint along, becoming an upskirt shot, completely and absolutely taking any power away from this subversion. The gaze of the camera becomes perverse and desperate to co-opt you into agreeing with its wandering eye. Especially when so much of the rest of the game is about what makes a person and dealing with existence, it just feels extremely out of place to me. So, the other themes. A lot can be summed up under the philosophical school of existentialism. Broadly, questions about the nature of existence, how to process this along with the meaning of being human. There is a lot more history here with grand implications, and although I've done a bit of reading, I'm probably not the right person to talk about this in depth. I'm still figuring a lot of it out. If we think about androids or AI, it's quite often used in stories to raise the question of what it is to be human. This is done by bringing something that's traditionally considered non-human, but has a lot of shared aspects, and analysing it against humans to see where the similarities and differences lie, often with these questions of can a machine ever be human, or is it just this performance that we interpret as being human? But Nier does away with this question, assuming the interior human with the androids and the machines pretty much from the off, which allows it to explore these topics in a deeper level instead of that surface question. These are topics that come up in the main game but are explored more deeply in side quests, each tending to be these smaller examinations into the topic of existence. For instance, one large daughter machine, much larger than their parents, as, of course, machines have done away with biological restrictions, starts asking where do children come from. The android protagonists stumble in a similar manner to many adults who have had to try and navigate this subject. Biological processes of our bodies are a difficult subject to try and navigate, especially when teaching it, but you get the impression the question may be deeper here for these machines. It brings to light the weirdness of their existence altogether. The question of procreation has a different set of meanings to explore for machines. Also, the androids just don't know about machine anatomy. In a lot of these side quests we get the impression that machines are often performing humanity, but with some level of anxiety that comes with you knowing you are doing this. I mean this in the sense that humans are often performing humanity, not that the machines are outside of being human. In fact, the very nature of these side quests brings them closer in some regards. There is both an unsurety about their actions and what they mean, a fear that they are performance at most or pointless at worst. And this also shines a light on our protagonists. They are created beings also. Surely they suffer from the same issues. An aggressive self-analysis pervades throughout many of the encounters and only intensifies as things continue. Initially your party spouts this integrated rhetoric, one that comes from their own creation, but being naturally curious, we have them unpick this as time goes on. You see this in the beginning about 9S making statements about the words that the machines are using, brushing them aside as random words pulled from a database. They can't be forming sentences and words after all. So the game has you throughout playing someone associated with Yorha, whether directly involved in their operation or someone who has forgone their rhetoric. For the rest of this I'm going to cover the story of 2B and 9S, as this is where the game establishes rhetoric of Yorha. Again, that sentiment I mentioned a few moments ago, don't worry about the machines, they don't feel, they don't have proper speech, it's just pulling random words. What an odd way to say that. And it goes deep with these points, to the stage where denying the machine's interiority seems like madness. 9S consistently does this throughout. At the start this works on the player through the design of the machines. They contrast greatly against the hyperhuman bodies of the androids after all, who have the same bodies as me, ostensibly a human, allegedly. And whilst you are in the early stages of the game, where the player characters have this intense view on the world, you come across a few things that immediately raise questions. Although it takes 2B and 9S a little while to get to the same place as the player, this process tends to be fairly straightforward, but some of it ends up being super subtle. You know, the fact that there's an android resistance camp. These are shown as distinct from Yorha, but how does that work? When and for what purpose were they created? And why don't Yorha just accept them into working for them, bringing them back to the bunker? And then we have the more obvious but just as affecting Pascal's village, a group of machines disconnected from the central network to try and subsist as a pacifistic village who oppose the war on moral grounds. I know this is more obvious in the sense that you have machines that are opposed to combat, and that immediately brings everything into question that Yorha believes. 2B and 9S repeatedly say up to this point that the machines are warlike enemies. But the village, once you get to know them, they are just a nice bunch of machines living in dread about how to actually go about this living process. Side note, we also get Sartre here, named after the famous existential philosopher. He just seems to mumble nonsense phrases broadly linked to philosophy. No one around him takes him seriously. And we get another subversion with a group of Yorha soldiers, who are known as the Betrayers in this other side quest. And they, well, betrayed Yorha. But what does it mean to betray Yorha? What stands in opposition aside from machines? You get snippets of something being amiss with them, but it is a challenging proposition for our protagonists. I mean, they are similar units to yourself. And if they can betray, if it's within their programming, then surely it can be for you too. Which brings up a whole host of other questions. And that's what these sections do really, really well. They show the assumptions built into the main characters, but also sketches out that they are assumptions, by having valid refutation built in the world. If only they looked a bit deeper and saw for the world how it is. But the monument of Yorha within themselves is so large that it proves difficult to shake. For me, this is the arc of the game that has stuck with me. How the narrative that you've absorbed into oneself can be limiting and blinding. How these ideas pervade through groups and cause actual change in the world. And the revelations of the war between the androids and the machine remain a component of the game that stands out throughout. The initial attack feels like the first android attack in a while. It appears that the fight is just local and this direct fight. Also recent, very recent. But as the narrative opens up, this unravels. It slowly becomes apparent that the war has been going on longer than maybe anyone's memory. There are battle references that are thousands of years ago. This has been going on for a long, long time. Within this you see how each side has developed a dogma that hides the truth of the matter. To get at a history hidden behind the shadow of dogma would require such intense digging that it's not only hidden by rhetoric, it's been hidden on purpose. As a player, it's probably possible to write this timeline down of each action taken and sketch out an idea of first causes. I mean, games are always going to be less complicated than reality, but I don't think that's the point. The murkiness is. Often within debate about history, outside of the academic, you find a race back to first causes, a search to find where the blame is set in stone. But using this as a method to find truth always seems open to refutation. There is always a prior butterfly effect that is previous to yours, but then all you have to do is look deeper and find one prior to theirs, as if it's all deterministic. If only we can find the person who threw that first rock, we can tell who the bad guys really are, instead of it being anything material or ideal. Writing this, I can see how this could be taken as a form of moral relativism, but I think that ignores the underlying truth of what does actually exist in this game. Seeing other people's perspective doesn't serve the point of freeing everyone to believe whatever they will, only to break away from their own programming, the deeply internalised damaging views. The other clever thing it does is cuts across this with these human stories, seeing the effects on various characters and the pain it causes. Pascal's village is wiped out, the resistance is attacked repeatedly. No one gets away from the war around them, and during this 2B is actually close to the point of acceptance and freedom from the chains that bind. The machines at one stage take down the Yorha bunker, and this actually puts her in a position of being able to think about the world freely. And the tragedy? She never gets to. She is killed before this stage, in an act of war by the network machines. So you can see how these traumas build on top of each other and layer. And that's where 9S comes in. He deals with the actual consequences of 2B's death. Even though he is eventually in the same position to try and be questioning of the world, the pain caused by the Forever War means that he's going to double down on his dogma. Machines must die. We follow a character who becomes twisted on his own rhetoric, who gives up all curiosity and chooses to accept that the only path forward is death of all the machines, even if that's just going to fold itself back into this Forever War. It doesn't help that he's a bit of a shithead throughout the game. From here, the rest of the game does a great job of developing the context for the narrative. It twists and turns through the mystery that gives you the truth at the core of the world. These prove to be interesting also, a story about manipulation of war between two sides to the benefit of an outside power, how rage-seep dogma can lead to your target just being the world around you and everything, and how you can kind of get through this in some regards. The nature of history, the fact it's repeating and circular, the very fact that we can track the views of 2B and 9S as they learn about the world and develop a actual idea of what's going on, shows that they can get away from some of the dogmatic approaches forced into them, but it also shows the traps that can lead along the way, and actually how the world itself can feed back in on this and lead people down some dark paths. I think 9S always had the capability of being a monster, but the world didn't help that either. Yoko Taro, one of the big names behind this game, did not want the game to be explicit. He openly says that you shouldn't be able to read absolutely everything from a game. There are things we can know and things we can only guess at. I think this is the most interesting space to be in. I'm writing this, I think it's near impossible to cover all the topics within this game, but hopefully I've sketched out something that is at least interesting, or gets at what I find interesting. There are so many threads that you can pick out to dive into, so much that you can sit on weeks after playing and find an interesting concept or a different perspective. So much I've left untouched that I highly recommend seeing this game for yourself. This video is by no way conclusive or gets at the whole of Nier, but it does show some of what I find so engaging, interesting, and makes me want to go back and play through everything leading up to this point. If only I can bring myself to pay £50 on a PS2 game that by all estimations is bad. I should probably just go find a YouTube compilation of all the cutscenes. Anyhow, that's going to be it for today. Thank you for watching. My name has been Billy. Goodbye.